Elias Rodriguez, the person who was behind the murder of the couple in Washington, D.C., has just been indicted. My understanding is indicted sort of like more things were brought on. Originally, it was just sort of the murder part, and now they are adding the hate crime aspect of this, which could at least my understanding is in theory include the death penalty since it's a federal charge. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Today we'll discuss this. We'll discuss also how a little bit more about how things like that are allowed to happen and what can be done to change that. Since we are talking about the law, I'm happy to have James Valiant here, who actually has a little bit more knowledge when it comes to American law, maybe a little bit more than I do. So it's great to have him on. And yeah, so James, maybe before we go, just to give people a reminder of what happened right after this person killed that Jewish couple, about when he was getting arrested, what he decided to do. So let's just watch this short 20-second clip.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
So, James, can you tell us a little bit more about what this recent indictment means?
Well, first, I just want to say that as a former criminal prosecutor, this is an extraordinary case in one sense. Very rarely do murderers while they're being arrested for the murder, announce their motive and their premeditation and intent quite so clearly as he did here. Usually, their lawyer tells them, of course, to shut up, whatever their motives. But this was obviously politically motivated. It was obviously intentional and deliberate in a way and the other evidence in this case makes that very plain too. This guy has a long footprint on social media and elsewhere, which indicated that all Israelis over 18 he thinks should be wiped out. How any aiders and abettors of the Israeli self-defense of itself after October 7th are subject, in his mind, to being validly killed, murdered. And so you can see his intention, his motivation. The crime itself was particularly repulsive. He flew in precisely because he knew that there was a Jewish event going on in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. You can see him pacing in front of the venue where it was happening before it happens. And then when people started coming out, he just started opening fire and shooting them. And after killing the young man, the young woman who was initially shot was crawling away and trying to sit up, and he shoots her again. He reloads and he shoots her again. So he wanted them dead. He wanted them, and this was premeditated, planned. He had to buy flight tickets to get there. I mean, nothing could be more deliberate and premeditated. And it's multiple murder. There's no question about it. And he stated his motive as clear as could be stated when he was being arrested. So it's a particularly egregious crime. Now, any federal crime has to go through what the Constitution requires, and that's a grand jury indictment. He has to officially be charged, in effect. It's not uncommon what happened here. When you get initially indicted for murder, they'll see what other charges apply. And now, as I understand it, there are 7 charges that apply. We can discuss the validity. We can leave aside
9, I think, is what I've
9.
seen.
Excuse me, then I stand corrected. But now it's several charges that he's got, not just, the murder charge was sort of a placeholder. But it seems to me that under the existing law, this is a gimme sort of case, and an easy case that way. It seems overwhelming. And not being a prosecutor involved in government anymore, I can give my private opinion on what I think the state of the evidence is. The man is guilty. It's obvious he's guilty. Anyone defending him is obviously a hateful defender of vicious murder. So we can talk about hate crime as a aggravating factor, because it's a very interesting thing how law will distinguish between kinds of hate or kinds of, I mean, if you do a deliberate murder, you know, it very frequently involves hate, but our law has gradations of the sorts of hate that are involved. It seems to me that once you have a very deliberated murder of multiple people, you've already rung the bell, it seems to me, for the maximum treatment. So we can argue about the hate crime allegation. That's a worthy topic. We can argue about the death penalty itself, but that does subject him to the death penalty. The United States Supreme Court, more than 50 years ago, declared that the death penalty was a violation of the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. Part of the Bill of Rights says that cruel and unusual punishments should not be inflicted. For a short time, the Supreme Court thought that this capital punishment was just inherently a violation of the Eighth Amendment, despite flying in the face of the better part of 200 years of history, where America obviously had the death penalty. That was changed after only a few short years. But in the years since, the Supreme Court has told us that it can't just be any old murder that gets the death penalty. There has to be a high level of certainty, and it has to be an aggravated kind of murder. And there has to be, let me put it this way, you can't have minors, you can't have people who are mentally ill who qualify. So they've given all kinds of conditions of the Supreme Court for when it's appropriate to give the death penalty. But this clearly qualifies under all the conditions that the Supreme Court has in effect placed on the government for executing someone for a crime. And in justice, ladies and gentlemen, there really can be no doubt that someone of this kind deserves death. He intentionally, premeditatedly killed these people with no valid excuse or justification, say like self-defense. And he killed more than one. And nothing could be more deliberated, in my view, and nothing could be more certain than the evidence we have in this case. There's tons of video evidence, physical evidence, etc. He was found wandering in the building, for example, afterwards, and easily to identify. He was arrested at the scene. He declared his motive. This is a case of high level of certainty, and in justice, this man should be executed, in my view. Now, you can still argue about the death penalty. Can we ever achieve the kind of certainty that is necessary? Well, let me present this case on the plus side for death penalty, because there really can be no question of this man's individual guilt. You'd have to invent the most bizarre and elaborate arbitrary assertion to begin to think that this man, that there's even the slightest shadow of a doubt that this man is guilty, and guilty of a very heinous and barbaric crime, killing young people. I think the young man was 30 or so, the woman was in her 20s. They were shortly to be married, and they were killed simply because they were Israeli embassy workers at a Jewish event. And so there's the wider issue of the increasing violence against Jewish people across the globe, which is unmistakable now. In my country in particular, you've seen multiple instances of violence, not just vandalism, arson, and things of that nature, but directly killing people because they were perceived as Jews or Zionists or Israelis, which is now on the left, it's cool to call, Jews all kinds of horrible things. On the right, there's now a growing group that says it's okay to call Jews all kinds of things. And when you're accusing Benjamin Netanyahu of genocide, when you're accusing, again, in a bizarre, morally perverse way, calling him the Hitler and the Nazi and anyone who helps him, then all you're doing is encouraging this kind of violence. I would ask world leaders who are hip to arrest Netanyahu on so-called war crimes, ask them to think that through very carefully, because they are, in fact, encouraging. They're obviously not the shooters. I make a moral distinction between the world leaders who say are rushing to say, we'll arrest Netanyahu if he sets foot on our soil. But if you think that what's going on in Gaza is genocide, then you are obviously encouraging people. I mean, how should we react to Nazis now? I don't think we should be killing, people on the street who, without valid self-defense or defense of others. I don't think that you should just be able to walk up and punch someone simply because they claim to be a communist or a Nazi. I don't think that's correct. On the other hand, I think it takes force, a real threat of force, an imminent threat of force to justify the use of force. So merely saying that Netanyahu is a dictator causing genocide is not enough to justify violence. Even if you believed it and it were true in itself, it would not be enough to justify violence against Israelis. On the other hand, when you go around making that irresponsible accusation of genocide, when you make those irresponsible comparisons, then you are encouraging the people out there who might believe what you say and take you seriously in those irresponsible comments, to take matters into their own hands and treat all employees of the Israeli government, say, as he puts it, the killer here puts it, aiders and abettors in genocide. And so he feels morally justified, as you can see by when he was arrested, free Palestinians that are dragging him off. He feels morally justified. In this sense, it's very much like that Luigi guy who killed the healthcare CEO on the streets of Manhattan. People who believe that they're morally justified in murder. And that's the state that we've reached. Totally peaceful people simply being innocent, utterly innocent people being gunned down in the most vicious ways by people who think they're morally justified in doing it. And still more disturbing is the wider population on the internet who will say, yeah, he was morally justified in doing this, or this is what you get when Israel does X, Y, and Z. They are encouraging this kind of thing. They are giving the moral justification for this kind of thing, even if they themselves are not guilty of the murder. And I would, of course, draw that clear distinction. But yeah, he's subject to the death penalty. He might well get the death penalty. It's going to be a DC jury, which tends to be left of center. So my one concern here is not the evidence. My concern here is the jury population from which his jury will certainly be picked.
Is that gonna be a separate sort of like ruling? Like they can both say, yes, he's guilty, but no to the death penalty? Or is that gonna be...
Typically, that's exactly what is required. A separate jury find. First, they'll find whether or not he committed the murders. Are you guilty of... Now, in your view, does this also merit the death penalty jury? And it'll take the jury and the judge to say, yes, he deserves the death penalty. And then, of course, there will be inevitable appeals. So it'll be many years, if at all, even assuming that the judge and jury agree that he is subject to the death penalty.
And with that, I think somebody in the chat asked, well, first we have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And somebody asked, they won't do it in my opinion, even if it's justified, which it is. I think Americans don't have stomach for it. Well, thankfully, we are not asking every single American, just 12 jurors. Well, I guess a bit more if it does get appealed.
Funny, because most Americans, I think, do support the death penalty. And this case, if any case, certainly justifies it. Even in a liberal place like California, where they don't execute people anymore, the population of California supports the death penalty. Even despite the governments that a one-party system they keep electing to Sacramento to run the state, the governor simply won't allow executions to happen. And that's within their power, but it runs counter to America's general opinion that the death penalty is justified. And in this case, I think most people who support the death penalty would think that this is a clear death penalty case.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look up data. I see one from Pew Research. 64% of Americans say when someone commits a crime like murder, the death penalty is morally justified. So at least the moral justification is definitely there, even if not in practice, or at least sort of like majority of Americans. Somebody earlier asked, then how do we still have 13th Amendment exception clause?
13th Amendment exception clause. Oh, involuntary. The 13th Amendment made slavery unconstitutional in the wake of the Civil War. It said neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, where the person is duly convicted, shall be imposed. That is to say, can they force you to work if you've been convicted of a crime? Yeah, they can. Does that justify things like the military draft? No, it doesn't, although the Supreme Court has said, no, 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 the military conscription has nothing to do with the 13th Amendment, even though it obviously does on the face of the language. It's involuntary servitude. But I don't understand the connection. The 13th Amendment does not make capital punishment unlawful. It makes forced work possible when you are convicted.
Well, with that, we can go a little bit more into sort of the hate crime aspect, which I think we talked about once before when we talk about the, when we talked about the Ireland story where one woman spat on a couple of Israeli guys in a restaurant, and we talked about if there should be sort of this idea of a hate crime, which at least my understanding is that basically it's sort of like a separate charge that can be brought on, like let's say in this case is a murder. If it's I'm not sure what are all the criteria, like racially, religiously, like different ways of being motivated, it can be sort of like add on. Now I'll repeat the point I made last time. I kinda can think of the reason why I could see sort of the justification for it, with the main thing being if somebody let's say kills their spouse or somebody and somebody kills motivated, basically is targeting a whole group of people. In some ways I view that other person, that second person, sort of like a bit more dangerous to the broader society, and I could see like a sort of added charge because of the added like danger when we're dealing with it. Now in this case, this guy is going to life either way, I assume. So I'm not sure how much that changes. But yeah, James, any of your thoughts on this?
You see, that's the thing. Does that difference make the difference in that case? If we know he's locked up for life without a possibility of parole, let's say, then the continue. I mean, most murderers, that's the only murder they're ever going to commit, and it's usually very specified. But I would ask people to tell me what the danger difference is and what the moral difference is when we talk about different kinds of hateful, deliberate, motivated murder. So if I'm killing you because I want revenge for some slight, let's say you financially screwed me out of some deal we made 10 years ago, and I hunt you down, track you down out of my deep hatred of the fact that you ripped me off. It's in effect a kind of hate that's motivating me. How do we discriminate between varieties, flavors of hate, and what justifies that? Now, as you point out, if my hatred is for someone because of their religion, race, national origin, things of that sort, I pose a danger, as you just observed, to an entire class of people, not just to one person. And most murders normally are zeroed in on that. But if you're capable of deliberate murder at all, you're already in a dangerous category, it seems to me. That may be the only murder you would be likely to commit were you to be allowed out, but it might not be. That is to say, you're the sort of person who's capable of committing deliberate, premeditated killing of another human being. That in itself makes you a danger, an ongoing danger. First, we have to punish you appropriately, proportionately for the crime you committed. And the immediate effect of that is to make the community, the rest of us, safer by removing that person from being able to do that, from the community at large, as we say, from being able to do that again. Once you've demonstrated that you're capable of crime, you have demonstrated that you are an ongoing danger. And so we need to lock you up to protect everyone else and to punish you. That's the primary thing. But theory and practice are a unity. We're objectivists. And so we understand that theory and practice form a logical unity here. The danger to the community, as the term is used, is proportionate, it seems to me, to the degree of the crime. The worse the crime, that is to say, the more you need punishment, the greater the danger. And they are perfectly coordinated in proportionality, it seems to me. If you're capable of murder, you're capable of murder. If you're capable of armed robbery, now think about this though too. If you do an armed robbery or kidnap, you should. It's a reasonable and natural consequence that someone should should die. If I pull a gun at a bank or I pull a gun at a store and I say, "Give me the money," the threat of murder is right there. And anyone who, say, shoots back or there's gunfire and the bullets start flying, guess what? It's the guy who started the armed robbery who can be charged properly with murder, because he threatened death when he walked in and pointed his gun, or whatever the weapon he's using, if it's a deadly weapon, a crossbow, a knife. If you threaten death, as of the or else in any of your crimes, if it's an implicit threat of death in that crime, it seems to me that whether you walked in with a deliberate intention, wouldn't you have preferred it to have gone without any death, the armed robber? Maybe he would have. But once he initiates a kind of force that threatens death or great bodily injury, seems to me he's on the hook, and that's the way American law recognizes. But in this case, it's real straightforward and simple. We have clear-cut, deliberated, premeditated murder of multiple people. And that's an aggravant that the Supreme Court recognizes, a potential aggravant that justifies the use of the death penalty.
Someone in the chat says we could just force him to pick fruits and veggies for no wages. I'm wondering if that even really does create any productivity, because if you have to count the fact that I mean, even just imagine the amount of money that's going to be spent on all the trials that's gonna happen, right? There is nothing he could produce to give that back. I think and also it's not the purpose of the state. The purpose of state is not to make money or make it even, especially if it's not you could make that case in financial crimes, right? But in a case like this, the only purpose is to remove the threat and deliver justice. Again, two people are dead and there's nothing we can do to bring them back. And just to make sort of one more point on the hate crime, and I guess we're kind of running out of time and I wanted to bring several more things. But sort of, I guess one last thing you could say is, the fact is that this person, Elias Rodriguez, he wasn't targeting these two people, right? He was targeting any Jews that would come out of that museum. And it just happened that this is the couple that it was.
Yeah, hideous. And there's no restitution that you can do for something like this, right? You say, well, I'm very, very sorry. I'll pay full restitution. I'll do what I can to make up for what I did. How can you make up for murder, the deliberate killing of human beings? You can't. There's no bringing it back. You can't give them the happy married life that they were about to enjoy together. You can't make it up to their mothers. You can't make it up to them having a life. These two young people were just gunned down and slaughtered on the streets. And there is no proportionate justice. Let me put it in exact terms here. The only kind of proportionate justice here would be the death penalty. Now, people might hesitate to say, well, should the state be able to kill people? Because if they kill people, even in response, what if it turns out that say some extraordinary improbability turns out that they're innocent? Well, how do you make it up? And because you can't, just as murder can't be you can't provide adequate restitution for murder, so you can't give any kind of proper restitution if you executed someone, as opposed to, say, falsely imprisoning them until you learn unjustly imprisoning them until you learn the truth. But in this case, as I say, it's overwhelmingly clear. There's no doubt. I suspect what you're going to have is a psychological mental defense, because the evidence is so overwhelming. The defense attorneys themselves will probably want their client here examined by psychiatrists and psychologists, and try and say, well, he had some kind of diminished capacity or insanity or something of that kind. But it's going to be hard to do. He didn't bring a banana; he brought a gun. He went to a very specific location very intelligently. That is to say, it took cognitive skill on his part to execute the crime that he did. And if he can do that, if he's got that much on the ball, it seems to me the law should not enter into any further conversation about his sanity or mental state. He was capable of reasoning, and then get this, it's the most hateful kind of reasoning or thinking. It's illogic. It's total illogic. It's irrationality. On the other hand, it is a cognitive, deliberated state. He could have thought differently. He could have been more logical. He could have been more rational. He could have applied ethics properly. So he had that capacity. He wasn't so psychotic that he was, envisioning, hallucinating a Martian invasion and trying to kill me with a banana. He thought that the Gaza situation justifies the killing of Israelis. And he very carefully planned that out, got to the right place, used a gun, and aimed it in the most malicious way you can possibly imagine. So it's going to be a tough sell, it seems to me, to the jury or to a judge that he's mentally diminished. But when the physical evidence and the circumstantial evidence is as overwhelming as this, I think he's doesn't have much of a chance other than, say, a mental kind of defense. But that too, as I say, is problematic given this case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wish we could get a televised version of this, but I believe in federal cases it's not possible. But with that, James, any last thoughts or comment on that, and where can people find you?
That's true. Federal courts don't have cameras in them. Some jurisdictions, many states, like my state, California, you can have cameras in the courtroom, and the media can carry the O.J. Simpson case, for example, very famously, as they did, what was it, 28 years ago, something like that.
Or more recently, Kyle Rittenhouse was the one I was thinking about.
Exactly. There you go. Federal rules are different when it comes to televising this. We may have to just deal with reports and sketches. Where can you find me? You can find me here at the Ayn Rand Center UK, where you'll get a perspective on these things that you're not going to find anywhere else. And in October, you know where you'll find me? You're going to find me in Orange County, California, at the Irreplaceable Spark Conference. And if there's at all any way you can make it there, I would urge everyone to make it there, because this is going to be an objectivist event unlike any that has ever been. So I'm excited to be part of that. So please come join us in Orange County in October.
And for that, you can check out objectivism.co.uk. So make sure to do that. Thank you, James. Thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat. And something we didn't get to talk about today is what is making this hate possible and this kind of crime possible. So on the episode of the reality show, we'll talk about how the world will hate Jews as long as they exist, and why that is the unfortunate or very deliberate. Again, this is something people are choosing to do. So make sure to join us there. Thank you again, James. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you in just a bit. You can follow the link in the chat. Bye-bye.
Be safe.